Okay, I'm finishing up here. This would be part 6. We're going to focus on the where we left off was the beginning of the play um, when Neptune came into play in the early 2000s, and we were at war with Iraq and Afghanistan, and George Bush was commander in chief, represented by the red ostrich feathers. Of course, ostrich feathers also are an indication of blue blood or aristocracy, and we certainly see that with the Bush family. I believe his father was knighted by the Queen, and their lineage goes back to that uh, whole thing. Um, an interesting thing here with the snake and his father, I see this tail hook in the belly, this yellow color, once again, coming to the yellow color. Of course, tail hook was a very sordid party. I believe it was the airmen in the U.S. Navy, or it was a naval party or an airman party. But this was under H.W. Bush's presidency in, I think, 1991. This happened. Um, the tailhook incident, as it's known as. This was like I said, a sordid party that were pretty infamous. This one happened to get out of control. Not that it was out of control, but perhaps it just got outed as there were several men and women raped at the party. You don't normally hear of male rape, but apparently there was some male rape going on at this tailhook incident. Um, it became quite a story. They tried to bury it quite quickly. Well, the odd thing is, if you go look up the patch for that party, they produced a patch, gave it to all the soldiers, kind of a memento of this party that they have every year. This one had the cartoon character of Bart Simpson, and I can't remember what it said. Hear nothing, see nothing, say nothing, or something like that. I don't even remember, but um, what I'm getting here on this side is very much a Bart Simpson archetype, just a smart ass. Uh, Kind of goes back to that whole haughty body language, that whole character of being a jester, um, a satyr, you know, um, type of disposition or archetype. Um, the zealous one, and of course we all know George Bush was zealous, too zealous, going off to war in Iraq with very little evidence or no evidence at all that Iraq was involved with 9/11. And in fact, President Bush was known as the 9/11 president here, the plane and the towers. And I'll get into that a little bit later. I've got some other video on this that I produced a decade ago that I'm going to probably have you watch instead of me going over all of these clues and everything again. But there's a lot of references to George Bush and the ostrich, of course, sticking your head in the sand like an ostrich over weapons of mass destruction. That's pretty classic right there. Um, just a amazing reference to an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. George Bush doing the same thing over weapons of mass destruction. Just wow. Um, George Bush was a runner and wore a headband, a sweatband on his head. And I kept getting the reference to Mill Liner. Milliner is one who makes hats, but in this case it's Milliner. George Bush was a maligner, and George Bush maligned his enemies very clearly in the record. You can check that for yourself. Of course, George Bush was an avid runner, so much so that the Secret Service had to get bicycles in order to keep up with them. He was published in running magazines. He run, very much like an ostrich. It's ostriches are known for their running. Fastest curious animal on the planet. Um, and they go after you. If you've ever had an ostrich chase you, you can't outrun them. And George Bush was very much like that to his enemies, relentless, like the ostrich. Um, George Bush used to wear ostrich boots. Um, George Bush is known for his stupidity. Well, there's an old Islamic phrase, stupid as an ostrich. Not that ostriches are stupid, but they look stupid, do stupid things, so humans equated ostriches as being stupid. Stupid as an ostrich. Well, George Bush is renowned for his stupidity, like the ostrich. Okay? Um, Ostriches are known for being a bad mother. They're referenced in the Bible as such. In their wily ways, they may crush their own eggs under their own feet as they get startled. This is, of course, by accident. This is not something that the ostrich means, but this is how the phrase the bad mother came into being in the biblical references, because people thought they were bad mothers, but they just didn't understand nature. But in any case, what we see here right straight off of George Bush is the water world, is the city with the water lapping at the shores of the city. Well, what happened in 2005, 4 or 5? It was Katrina, late in Leo, right? And George Bush was referenced as not take care of his own people, the bad mother, like the ostrich. Of course, red ostrich feathers, commander in chief, which he is. And there are a few more ostrich references actually in this image. So it's not only a Bart Simpson archetype, but very much an ostrich archetype, very much in Zelensky and George Bush. Certainly, we could say Zelensky is a bad mother over his people. It's terrible the way they're hauling people off the streets and throwing them on the front line. He's starting to be hated by his own people, as George Bush was by his own people. So anyway, we see this battle between the two, the Democrats versus the Republicans here. And of course, John Kerry lost the election. So he's trying to win the election, balance the wheel here. Of course, he's a Sagittarius. So, but anyways, we see this whole loop going on here. And so when I first did this reading, I got "You Can't Straighten a Curled Dog's Tail," and it was kind of a reference to Pope John Paul II and his stubbornness. And John Paul II loved dogs. John Paul II went after John Kerry for his stance on abortion, and the church was thinking about denying John Kerry communion. And this battle here is a representation of the feeding tube. And at that time, during the Pope's death, or when he was dying, his throat muscles had completely atrophied and he could no longer swallow. Now, this was the same thing that was happening with another person at that time that was famous in the news, called Terry Schiavo. This was a young woman. I believe she was around 30 years old or so, and had went on a diet, and her potassium levels had crashed out, and she had passed out and was without oxygen for about 15 minutes. And her husband found her, managed to get her to the hospital, but she was essentially brain dead, and her brain over some period of time after that had liquefied. And so she had an active brain stem. And so she had motor function and everything, but she was essentially blind, could not see, could not hear. She was essentially gone. So, anyways, 15 years had passed. Her husband wanted her to die and peacefully, and they had exhausted all measures to help Terry Schiavo, and so he had decided to let her go while this big legal battle had ensued, because Terry Schiavo's parents wanted to take care of her. And but the husband said this is not what her wishes would have been. Long story short, they're pulling the feeding tube out of Terry Schiavo, putting it back in, pulling it out. The last judge, Judge Greer, rules, and feeding tube gets pulled out. The whole Christian right was up in arms. Little kids were trying to go into the facility and give her water, because essentially Terry Schiavo was dying of dehydration and starvation. And the Pope had piped up about this, and the one reference I really see here coming out strong during this time is the phrase "better to be a live dog than a dead lion." And what do I mean by that is um, the Pope could have changed his stance on this issue, but he decided to go with, if technology, modern medicine allows you to stay alive, you must use that technology to do just that, stay alive as long as possible, as long as modern medicine allows it. The reasoning behind this is various from the church, but basically it's allowing God enough time to perform a miracle. Um, I know that sounds strange, but that's basically somewhat the belief of the Catholic Church. Another reason they won't let a woman get a DNC when they know the baby has died. They wait for the women to go septic in the hospital before they perform the DNC. This is just one of the requirements of the church. Like, God is going to perform a miracle and bring that baby back to life in the woman's womb, which I don't think we ever have a recorded case of that happening. But anyway, the point being, the Pope at that time is saying, no, keep Terry Schiavo alive. It's a duty of you Christians, and yada, yada, yada. Well, Terry Schiavo died at the end of March, and the Pope's throat muscles completely atrophy. And what's the recommended course of action? A feeding tube for the Pope. He refuses, right? The Pope refuses the feeding tube. He dies a couple days later. I think it was April 1st or 2nd. It's like 3 days after Terry Schiavo. And then, Time Magazine published an article, or Time cover, did the Pope commit suicide? Because the Pope did not follow his own dictates of the church to keep yourself alive as long as possible. In fact, he was saying, let me go to my Father's house before he passed on, which is normal, which is what we should do. We should let our loved ones pass in peace if it's that time. We shouldn't be making these great efforts to keep somebody alive and at great cost. It doesn't really do anybody any good. And so this was the great hypocrisy here. So in other words, John Paul II hung himself on his own words in here. That's why it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion, because his legacy became one of hypocrisy, where he could have took the opposite route and showed one of mercy and compassion, and updated this silly policy of the church. Anyways, on to the next part.